Hey girls, this is a video about the circulatory and respiratory system. So I want to start off today by showing how a lot of the body systems are very interconnected with the circulatory system. So if you look here, you can see how the circulatory system is basically the connection, okay, between many of the other body systems. Okay, it's going to help move oxygen and carbon dioxide around, okay, so get oxygen to all the cells, remove the carbon dioxide, okay, and take that carbon dioxide waste to the lungs, the respiratory system, and get the oxygen in. It's also going to work really well with the digestive system to help absorb nutrients and glucose for all the cells of the body. And then it's also going to work very well with the urinary system. Okay, the urinary system is the system that, or excretory system, is going to filter out any of the waste. Okay, and it's going to get that blood to filter, okay, from the circulatory system. So let's start with the circulatory system first and then go to the respiratory system. So first, with the circulatory system, what I want to think about is, what is blood? So the circulatory system basically pumps blood around your body. What is blood? Well, blood is made up of a couple of different components. Okay, it's made up of different formed elements, such as red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. Okay, so the red blood cells are the most important for us in this section. These are going to contain the protein hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is a really important protein that enables us to carry oxygen, because oxygen will loosely bind to the hemoglobin, so it can be transported all throughout the body. We'll get to white blood cells later when we study the immune system. There's also, most of the blood is actually plasma, which is mostly water, and other things like salts and any like the glucose and any other solutes that are dissolved in it. So the circulatory system works using 3 different types of blood vessels. So there's arteries, veins, and capillaries. It's really easy to get these confused and mixed up because, but the biggest thing that you want to keep in mind is that anything that's considered an artery is coming from the heart. So it's coming from the heart, okay, and either going to the lungs or going out to the rest of the body. A vein is always going to bring blood back to the heart. It's going to bring blood back to the heart either from the lungs or from the rest of the body. Capillaries are the very tiny, tiny little vessels. Okay, an artery and a vein are very large vessels. They're almost like highway systems. Capillaries are going to be more like your little like neighborhood roads. Okay, very, very small. Only about 1 red blood cell can pass through at a time. And this is the area where diffusion is going to take place. So let's zoom in on that. So diffusion is going to take place in these capillaries, or sometimes they're referred to as capillary beds. So oxygen and glucose are going to be transferred from the bloodstream into the cells, so the cells can get nutrients and they can get that oxygen for cellular respiration. Okay, so glucose and oxygen both used for cellular respiration. And then they're going to give off waste products. So carbon dioxide is one of them, and anything else like urea that we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay, these capillaries are very small, and this is where diffusion is going to take place. Remember that everything will diffuse from where it's highly concentrated to where it's less concentrated. So in the body, okay, like in the cells of the body, okay, away from like the lungs, we'll talk about that in a little bit, okay, the oxygen concentration is going to be very high in the bloodstream, okay, lower in the cell. So oxygen will diffuse from where it's highly concentrated to where it's less concentrated. Same thing with glucose. With carbon dioxide is going to build up in the cells as the cells go through cellular respiration. So it's going to be highly concentrated in the cells, less concentrated in the bloodstream. So the carbon dioxide will move from where carbon dioxide is highly concentrated to where it's less concentrated. Same thing with waste products. So let's go through how the circulatory system works. In humans, it's a little bit complicated, but it makes a lot of sense when you kind of map it out and look at the pictures and kind of try to trace the flow. So you're going to want to make sure that you understand how this flow works. And I've given you, or you can either print off this picture, I'll give you one in class with these images. So first things first, we have a pulmonary circulation, Okay, that's between the heart and the lungs. And we have systemic circulation. That's between the heart and then all the other tissues of the body. So what's going to happen is that blood is going to come from the body through the vena cava. Okay, superior is going to come from the lower part of the body. Superior is going to come from the upper part of the body. And it's going to collect in the right atrium. Okay, note that the right atrium it looks like it's on the left side of the heart. Okay, when you're trying to get your orientation for these vessels, you want to make sure that you're thinking about it as if you're like looking at someone, or it's like you. Okay, so almost like you're like laying there. Okay, so it's going to be your right. Okay, which looks like our left in the picture if you're looking at somebody else, but it's your right atrium. Okay, so it's going to come in the right atrium. Okay, the right atrium will contract and push the blood into the right ventricle. Atriums are always on the top, ventricles are always on the bottom. Okay, anytime you think about a heartbeat, it's like you can hear that like lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. That's one heartbeat. When you hear like that lub part, that's when the atrium's correct. The dub part is when the ventricles contract. So one heartbeat is going to push the blood from the atrium into the ventricle, and then it's going to go to the pulmonary arteries. Note that because this blood is coming from the body, it's going to be very low in oxygen, okay, because the cells of the body use the oxygen. So it's going to move from the right side of the heart and go to the pulmonary artery. Artery is away from the heart, away. Okay, so the pulmonary artery is going to take it to the lungs. Okay, this is pulmonary circulation. The pulmonary circulation, okay, at the lungs, okay, that's where the red blood cells are going to pick up oxygen, which we'll talk about in a second. And once these cells are oxygenated, okay, the blood is going to return to the heart so that way it can be pumped to the rest of the body. So it's going to return through the pulmonary veins. Remember, veins bring blood back to the heart. So through the pulmonary veins, it's going to come to the left atrium. Okay, it'll be pumped into the left ventricle. And then the left ventricle will pump it out the aorta. The aorta is pretty much the largest artery in your body, taking blood away from your heart. Okay, the aorta will send blood to every part of your body. Okay, and because it's oxygenated blood, this blood can help nourish your cells. Okay, so goes right atrium, right ventricle, goes to the lungs, goes to the lungs of the pulmonary arteries, comes back through the pulmonary veins, left atria, left ventricle, aorta, goes to the body, comes back through the vena cava. Okay, the vena cava is also a vein. Can I borrow your stapler? Sure, you may borrow my stapler. Okay, so heart attacks. Okay, we're going to watch a video on this later, but heart attacks essentially happen when one of the vessels that nourishes your heart, okay, gets clogged. So not the vena cava and not the pulmonary arteries and veins. These are actually the small little coronary arteries, okay, that actually carry blood to the heart to nourish the heart muscle. Because remember, this is a muscle, okay? There's lots of cells and they need nourishment. Okay, so if a plaque forms and this ruptures and causes a clot, okay, certain areas of the heart will not get any oxygen, which means that those cells will rapidly die, which could actually kill you. We'll watch a video on this to kind of get a good understanding of how this works. So compare and look at other organisms. So we have a 4-chambered heart, as I said, 2 atria and 2 ventricle. So if you look right here, mammals, birds also have this system. But other organisms like amphibians and fish have different systems. So we have a double loop. Okay, we have a pulmonary circuit and systemic circuit. Okay, some organisms like amphibians and reptiles actually have 3 chambers. Okay, so they have 2 atrias and 1 ventricle, and then they will also have a pulmonary and a systemic circuit. But fish are actually a little bit different. They have 1 atria and 1 ventricle, and they actually have blood mixing. They really don't have two separate loops. Okay, well, if you look at ours, there's no blood mixing. All of our oxygenated blood stays away from the deoxygenated blood. Okay, the less advanced you get, okay, in terms of these organisms, okay, the more blood mixing, okay, the less efficient it is. If we kind of go even further away from vertebrates, there's also different types of circulatory systems. So we have a closed circulatory system. Okay, lots of organisms, even like worms, have closed ones, where vessels actually enclose all the blood. If you look here, an organism like a grasshopper actually has an open circulatory system, which means that its heart is basically like a turkey baster. If you put the turkey baster inside the gravy and just kind of squeeze it, and it just kind of moves the gravy around, that's what the heart does. Okay, it just basically moves everything around. Okay, so let's go on to respiratory system. Okay, so first let's talk about gas exchange. So the most important thing about the respiratory system is that gas is being exchanged. So oxygen needs to come in, carbon dioxide needs to get out. This is the method of bringing in nutrients, getting rid of waste. So how this happens, when you breathe in, your diaphragm is actually going to contract. Okay, when your diaphragm contracts, it's going to make more space for your lungs. Okay, so larger volume, which is going to pull air in, okay, with pressure. If you remember from chemistry, PV equals nRT, okay, increasing the volume, decreasing the pressure, which is going to pull that air in. Or excuse me, increasing the volume. Yeah, increasing the volume, decreasing the pressure. Okay, so as you're breathing, so that's going to pull air into your lungs. Okay, and when air comes into your lungs, it's going to travel through your mouth or through your nasal cavity, okay, down your windpipe, also known as a trachea, okay, and down the bronchi, into the left and the right lung. Okay, when it gets to the very little end, it's going to hit these little alveoli. They're like basically little air sacs. These little air sacs are going to provide a place where capillaries can come in contact with the air. Okay, little tiny capillaries. So oxygen can come in, carbon dioxide can diffuse out. Okay, oxygen is highly concentrated inside the alveoli and in the atmosphere too. Okay, less concentrated here, so oxygen will diffuse into the bloodstream and then be picked up by the red blood cells. Carbon dioxide is going to be highly concentrated in the bloodstream, less in the alveoli, so it will diffuse this way. Okay, these systems work together very, very closely. So respiratory system and circulatory system depend on each other very, very closely. If you think about it, there are other methods of gas exchange. So we have lungs. Other organisms have lungs, but that's not the only method. Some organisms have gills, okay, or just rely on diffusion. So with like a sponge and caterpillars, okay, they're just going to rely on enough oxygen diffusing in and carbon dioxide just naturally diffusing out. There's not really the diaphragm or any kind of structure to kind of help force it. Last thing I just want to kind of go over and talk about briefly are just fish, because it's kind of interesting. So if you look at the gills of a fish, when a fish is actually swimming, okay, the water is going to move over their gills. With the movement of the water going through their mouth and over their gills as they're moving forward, there's going to be a lot of surface area for diffusion to take place. Okay, that's why there are these feathery little structures. Okay, oxygen will diffuse from where it's highly concentrated to where it's less concentrated. Carbon dioxide will diffuse from inside the fish where it's highly concentrated out into the water where it's less concentrated. So same thing happens, okay? It just has a little bit of a different structure in order to do this. Okay, so this is the respiratory system and the circulatory system. The most important thing, if you can understand how oxygen is diffusing, okay, and how carbon dioxide is diffusing, from where it's highly concentrated to where it's less concentrated, that is the biggest thing you need to understand. We're going to be doing an exercise lab to kind of illustrate how these two systems are very interconnected. So please make sure you bring your notes with you to class. Have a good day, girls.